we have 2 days in a row here. You guys don't, but we do, which I think will actually be helpful for listening because we can remember what we've said in the previous episode. And so if you haven't listened to the previous episode, we will talk about that a little bit in this episode. It just builds on the conversation we were having. Michelle, at the end of our last discussion, brought up a child who was demonstrating Praxis emerging really in a beautiful way. He was playing with a barrel actually in a session with another clinician. But that example was a great way for us to demonstrate some of those core Praxis functions. We were trying to help go through some terminology of Praxis, and we really want to jump over to the executive functioning box on the spirit model. We get lots of questions about executive functioning, and I know personally I always could learn more in that box. And so Tracy found a beautiful quote that she believes, and I'm sure is correct. I have much faith in this lady's opinion, that will jump us from the high route of sensation, so the sensory discrimination box, and help us move across into the executive functioning box and how our executive functions help us with praxis and planning. So did I cover everything, Michelle? And would you like to share your quote now, Tracy?
Yes and yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna back up and share the whole quote. So I'm gonna do a little bit of story hour reading to you all here for a second. And where I'm pulling this from is actually the second edition of the Sensory Integration Theory and Praxis textbook. So we currently mostly reference the third edition, but this second edition was published in 2002. So it's a bit older now, like me. And
Fine wine.
This chapter is written by Marie Anzalone, dear colleague who I cherish so much, and Boo Murray, Elizabeth Murray. And it's about assessment. But what they're talking about in this section is talking about how sensory integration theory is in part a developmental theory. So in the spirit model, I lean in really heavily into developmental theory. And Dr. Ayers did think about sensory integration as a developmental theory. We don't have every aspect of sensory integration mapped out developmentally. And one of the cool things that the spirit tries to do is at least hint at how developmental capacity underlies all the things that we do and the interrelationships between sensation, affect, and motor as the supports to capacity. So those are sort of foundational things that are within the spirit model. And, I was so lucky to work with Ellie Guilfoyle and Anne Grady and Josephine Moore, who wrote the Children Adapt book back in the 1980s. And this spiraling continuum is something that I really anchor my thinking into. And when we talk about that spiraling continuum of development, how it creates the kind of visual model of developmental theory. You can picture development by looking at this spiral forward, and then I kind of come back and I start to establish my foundation, that landing pad, and then I have these stretch points. And development has dynamic nature to it, and it has this kind of space, and it has tension as you run into that's hard for me and now I might have to fall back. And it's also kind of a reflection of how movement in development does go through some predictable things, some stages, if we will. They're not rigid or fixed, but there's some predictability. And also that there are skills that are way up the ladder, way up the arrow, that are far away from where I am maybe right now. So if I'm, a 2-year-old, I don't have the capacity that a 3-year-old or a 10-year-old or a 30-year-old has. I have, my developmental story will unfold and get me there, but it isn't the same. So we have to know a lot about development, and sensory integration in this way is a developmental theory, right? And I know we all love that, and we love the spiral. And Michelle, I love that you pulled it up and you're holding it up
laminated,
and looking at the picture. And
so good.
It's just such a, I need to pin it on the wall, actually. It just helps, it helps provide that image of why things are a bit different in different places, why children, siblings evolving a little differently. Like, it just is my tattoo. Maybe that's what I'll get in as a tattoo.
A spiral.
Because I think that's what we're doing too. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm in that too.
Yeah.
We just got all our techno right for the podcast. So it's like, we're moving up the arc. Podcasting, AV, IT, technicality.
Yeah, we are. Next, it'll be virtual reality, us meeting together. But let's not go there right now.
Yeah, well, and I love that in certain little circles of the world, people are starting to refer to the spiraling continuum again. It was one of the things when I talked to Ellie Guilfoyle about it to get permission to use it. I just said this is too essential. And in our field, especially in occupational therapy and sensory integration, we have to have a developmental approach. So having a model that's visual that helps us, and we can elaborate it in lots of different ways. We can add color and nuance and dimension. We can add width. We can think about that arrow not being a single thing, but lots of things within it. And we can start to really put a lot of story to that. But it's because essentially sensory integration is a developmental theory, and it matches on to developmental thinking. So we love that about it.
By sensory integration, and I'm going to waylay you before you get to share your quote, but by sensory integration being a developmental theory, by that kind of statement, do you mean that as our ability to process, integrate and use sensation, as that improves, like it unfolds in a developmental way? That's kind of what I mean, rather than as that improves. But the integration between the sensations for use unfolds in a developmental pattern, roughly. Is that right? So like as the vestibular system and the proprioceptors and the auditory system and the visual system come together, they do that in a developmental sequence, roughly, for most people. Is that what you mean by that statement? Okay.
Yeah, it means that, but I think it also means that our brain as the container for our learning and experience starts to enrich the neural connectivity that allows for capacity to express itself freely. Okay. And so that requires experience. And the experience that our brain is bathed in is a sensory affective motor experience. On most levels, the thing we're experiencing is the embodied experience. Okay. And then our memory working together with the embodied experience allows our brain to start to have the representation of, oh, I've got that, whatever that is. That could be any of our capacities. So we could go through and think about, whatever, maybe it is Praxis, since we're talking about Praxis and executive function. When you first start to be a little person who's moving, maybe we're talking about a 6-month-old and they're laying on their tummy on the ground, and they start to have the felt embodied experience that I can roll, I can move into sitting, I can weight shift. That weight shift allows me to reach out in space. So now I'm a reacher and a grabber, and now my space starts to elaborate. So the movement experience, proprioceptively, tactily, vestibularly, visually, is now helping to build this schema of I'm a weight shifter, I'm a reacher, I'm a obtainer of the world out in my space. And as that starts to happen, now I start to be more planful about that. I want that thing that's a little farther away. Oh, hello over there. I can go there, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So
And that makes sense.
so as that elaborates, Praxis is online now, and I start to be able to, from the affordances of my weight shifting capacity and my reaching capacity, now I start to be able to conceptualize that I can reach to lots of places. So now reaching has different meaning. It's more elaborated. And then as I discover that, that conceptualization leads to, what else could I do here? So ideation and planning start to become richer. And the motor execution itself, the enacting of, and the accomplishment or the errors and the correction of the errors, then that starts to tell my system, my proprioceptors, don't reach so hard because you're going to tip over or whatever, right? And so all of that elaboration is making it possible for me to be more purposeful in repeating the patterns. And that's how Praxis initially starts to develop, right? Is that picture?
Yeah.
Strong.
Very helpful, because you just painted the picture of the, I guess, the sensory, affective and motor functions developmentally unfolding in relation to Praxis.
And when we consider the children that it does unfold for in that way, and we drawing back to that image of the spiraling continuum of development, if it continues pretty smoothly, that impact of being a successful agent of change and being able to have that motivation to continue, maintain regulation, all the route of A, helps them keep going, keep being a little person that keeps trying, and it's not interrupted. I guess your little cherub that you spoke about in the last episode, Corey, where for whatever reason was interrupted, possibly due to sensory discrim processing issues, it interrupted that development. And so then you had that issue with regulation, impact of self as an agent of change, and, successful little cherub. So there was not a giving up, but a withdrawal of, There
was an autonomic overwhelm because of the gap in the capacity, and the integration hadn't happened. So autonomic nervous system going to
absolutely. And maybe that's part of that prediction making is, I'm not successful. I'm not successful. Like it just keeps showing up, and that grit, whatever words, resilience, that, I'm going to stick with it. I can get it if I just move forward a little bit more, like that part of it that helps you keep trying, and then perhaps improving sensory processing of probe, or, moving a little bit further afield to help that development unfold. Isn't the landing pad. He slid back down to that lower collapse state.
Came to more protection with his autonomic nervous system, because that's where his landing pad was, to keep him safe. Yeah,
it's so beautiful, right? So all of this is, and really for any child that we're treating, part of what is available to us in understanding them fully is to look at this from that integration and a developmental perspective. And so that's such a beautiful thing. So this chapter kind of goes on, and it says, so sensory integration theory is in part a developmental theory. However, when using a pure sensory integrative approach to intervention, we don't explicitly target the acquisition of skills, because the goal is to improve the underlying capacity rather than the skill itself. Nonetheless, we must understand children's developmental capacity in order to engage them in the appropriate therapeutic interactions and activities. Sensory integration theory helps us to understand these certain aspects of skill acquisition. Then it shifts and says, praxis involves conceptualizing, planning, and executing purposeful actions. So that's from Ayres. And then they say this important sentence. As such, praxis interacts with the changing developmental competence of the child. Praxis enables children to develop skills readily, and it becomes the basis for our occupations. But what I love about this quote about it, that it's interacting, praxis is interacting with the changes in our developmental competence. So what that tells us is that praxis isn't one thing, and it's not like we suddenly become practically available, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's this ever emerging journey, and praxis is a capacity that allows us to take what we have available right in this moment, match it to the demands and environment and supports, and then evince that adaptive response. So that's sort of Dr. Ayres's wisdom. But so when I think about praxis, it's not like you've just arrived at praxis or not. It's available to you in a developmental story.
Yeah.
So how that 6-month-old is a reacher is very different than, for whatever reason, my head just went to sport. And I was thinking about a basketball player and how they reach through space from wherever they're standing, and they shoot that ball through the air, but their hand and their trajectory and their praxis is reaching all the way to the target, which is like way over there and way up there in the sky.
Yeah.
And their efficiency as a motor actor is connected to the whole loop of ball in my hand to ball in the hoop. And praxis is a representation of that giant event that just happened. And so as a reacher for a 6-month-old, they can't throw a basket into a hoop, but the skill is the same.
Yeah.
The foundational function is still praxis, and it's still about limb trajectory and understanding space and understanding my relationship from my body as it interacts. So praxis is a part of that story. And it just elaborates and becomes more sophisticated. Yeah.
And I guess in terms of executive functioning with the basketballer, the sequencing of the whole gestalt of shooting the ball in the hoop and is much more developmentally complex than the 6-month-old reaching for the toy beside them. And so I guess is that how we're going to jump across to the executive
That is
function?
how we're going to jump across, because a 6-month-old's praxis is a match to all of the rest of the skills. So it's the sensory, affective, and motor systems. And the high route of A in the spirit model is kind of this connection to all of our executive functions through our motivational system, because that's the anchor of it, really.
Yeah.
But our executive functions, when you're a 6-month-old, it's not like you don't have them. You do have planning and sequencing available at a very early level. You do have inhibitory control, where it's like I'm reaching out and I want to get that ball, and my weight shift made me roll, but then I come back into the position to reach again because my motivational bias and my working memory helped me to say, no, what I wanted to do there was get the thing, not roll over.
Yeah.
And so what drives me to take this action again and to not be undone by my working memory getting short-circuiting me and like, okay, I'm no longer interested in that thing that I was reaching for. And we certainly see that interaction happen for all of us, not just the 6-month-old. The basketballer can be distracted enough by the guy in front of him that he's never going to forget that he's trying to make a point, but
he might forget the sequencing slightly, or
slightly.
and then it throws him off his shoot or whatever it is.
Yeah. And you can see, like, watching a basketball game where somebody's state of intensity does make them forget that they also should share the ball or stuff like that. And it happens, right?
And that's in Australia, the term is sledging, which is where you see something provocative to get the person's emotionally
Offside.
dysregulated,
Yeah.
so that their
strategy.
skill deteriorates.
Yeah. It's pretty
It's
cruel.
a tactic. But it's gone through the passage of time, and so it's like, do you know what? Emotional dysregulation, you slide back down in the skill level.
But how cool. I feel like you just reinforced Stanley Greenspan's affect is the glue. Because that baby, that 6-month-old, I was thinking as you were talking about, okay, it's always the integration across sensation, affect, and motor. And at that point, the reaching, like you described, for the toy is from a want, which is an affect and a motivation for, and the sensation of their own body in the position that they're in to then plan to reach towards wherever the thing is that they can see, all sensory based, right? All the feedback visually, all the current kind of information about where their body is, where it needs to be, where it ends up if it's not right, how to get back to. That's all sensory information that then has to integrate with the motor system to then actually reach. And so I was like, oh, that's so clear a description of the developmental stage that integrates sensation, affect, and motor of the 6-month-old reaching. So that was so cool. I was like, yes, affect is the glue for Praxis, and of course it is, but it was just such a beautiful description of that.
Yeah. So I just had this I have to tell this quick story. So I was working many years ago with this little boy who's 4.5, and he has Fragile X syndrome, and he came for a therapy intensive. And at the time, he had a little brother who was 2, who doesn't have Fragile X. And so his little brother is wanting to play all the ways of a 2-year-old. Okay. And so his brother, he loves cars. They love cars, both of them. But the older brother, he loves cars because he loves to take, like, the fire engine and the ambulance car, and those are sort of like each other. So they go over here. And all the red cars, he loves red. So all the red things go together. And all the blue things maybe are over here. And things that are bigger go over here, and things that are smaller go over here. And he's really into categorizing the affordances, and he's just into sort of categorizing, and he isn't really doing a lot more. Whereas the 2-year-old wants the cars to be cars. He wants them to crash into each other and to drive on the road and to make wee-wah sounds and to do all this stuff, right? So their play is really at 2 different, very different levels. And so pretend play is related to praxis, and affordances drive a lot of our ideation, and that drives a lot of our playfulness. So they're in really different places. But where affect is the glue is that when I started to really connect in with this guy around the red cars, red, and just like really juice it up. Like, this is the coolest thing that all the reds are together. Of course it is. And then my affect became an anchor for him to be curious about, well, what else could we do here? So for the 2-year-old, his own internal motivational bias was driving that. But for this other guy, he was sort of stuck in affordances. And my affect of the wee-wah car can go fast, and this slow, heavy truck goes slow. And I'm differentiating affordance now, and I'm showing him possibilities. I have this kind of squishy pillow, a triangle, and put it into a container. And now the car can go down it if I push on it. So it's affordance-based play, sort of showing him cause effect almost. Now the car is a goer, and it's a going into a thing, and it's crashing into a thing. And then that starts to change from I'm excited about red cars to I'm excited about red cars falling and rolling. But the affective glue of my helping him to really feel the interest and excitement about all those things is what helped him to move really from really a very low level of play into a very much more emerging pretend play in just a couple of sessions. Okay. And so affect is the glue. It's the thing that pulls our capacity forward. When we think about the landing pad, regulation is the base. So the low route of A is the foundation. But the high route of A is the motivational bias that pulls us forward.
To go to your stretch point. That's so cool. One pulls you forward and one anchors you where you need to be.
Yeah.
Gives you the foundation.
Fully.
And I think that's what we see, though, is what's literally the bandwidth. Like, how low do you go? How fast can, if you had the blue car, probably played the exact same game as you, Trace, and maybe all the pedo T's can really relate to the car matching, car crushing game. But for my little story like that, my experience of like that, if I had a blue car and I was using that to slide down the slide and crash into the red car, that was no go. It was a no go.
Blue's not okay.
Not okay in the red.
It's red.
I can have a red car and I can start to, have.
What are you doing with the blue, Michelle? Get that blue car out of here. Throw it in the bin.
Policeman, take that blue car over there.
Get it out.
Jail. You're in jail, Michelle, too.
And here we are thinking, damn, I'm playing with cars. Like, what do you want from me?
Yeah. Don't mess with the rules, Corey. That's what you got to do. It's that sliding down. It was like, okay, how can I keep you motivated? So for this little example is stay in the red car zone. Stay in the red car and then we can start to play in, different affordances to the point where you start to see them getting wobbly and that, they slide back down again and you have to focus on regulation. But that's the attunement and the pacing is just working out how far is that stretch, how far can my relationship keep you glued to and supported by this new idea that I'm, interfering with or presenting you with? Yeah.
Unfolding development, like potential opportunity here, right? Because I think it's so cool, Tracy, how you found the affective thing that related to what he was doing. So, because sometimes it's really hard to, when there's a lot of categorizing, which is like an affordance thing, right? It's like figuring out these categories is really interesting. Yeah. But sometimes it's like hard to figure out the affect that's interesting in the category. Do you know what I mean? So you were like, oh yeah, I can see the categories here, like the skill enough to see the categories and then add the affect to the category that was interesting to him. So I just think that's such a beautiful example of that, because that can be hard to do sometimes, because sometimes they're not, well, for me, it's like, I don't always know what the category, like I might guess, oh yeah, they're in a line, like, but is it actually the line that's interesting to you? Or is it all the lights that are matching at the same height? Or is it the shine on the top of the car, they all look the same? Or because my perception obviously is going to be different. And it's hard, that detectiveness, to try and figure out what is it that's actually interesting. But what a good example of building praxis from an affordance just in a category to then adding another affordance to that particular object, because I was interested in the category, and the affect that you used made me be interested in the next category that object could go into. Like, it's not just a thing that's red now it's a thing that's red and it rolls, or like it's a thing that's red and then crashes, or it goes down, or that's so cool. What a great example.
Yeah. Well, so if you're interested in that example, on our Learning Journeys community case processing example, it'll be posted there. So you can watch me process the spirit on that case, and you can watch video of me treating that little boy and see some pictures of it. So it's really alive in my head, because I just recorded that case processing for the Learning Journeys community, and it's connected to the topic that we're talking about. So I felt like,
So cool.
you know, kind of all of our two worlds here of the Spirited Conversations and the Learning Journeys community, they interact with each other in my mind,
Can't wait.
but also like conceptually and with us together as collaborators and wonderful, wonderful, good colleagues and friends. Anyway, so it's very cool to watch the video and see the treatment as it's happening.
Yeah.
But, you know,
cool.
I think when we think about the developmental nature of sensory integration, what's hard, you know, when you're treating kiddos like this is that you have to just stay with them in the moment. But in my head, I was noticing how he was trying to be interested in the like shifts that might be available. So that's an executive function that happens for kids when they discover affordances or properties or qualities of the things that are the same or different, maybe. And they're exploring that. But then sometimes they kind of do get interested in that shift of like, well, what happens if I hold the car this way instead of this way, right? And as they're exploring properties, that early sensory discrimination foundation is the foundation of the executive function system of shifting. This thing is still the same when it's like this or like this. And that early perceptual system is what gives rise to awareness and knowledge and cognition and construct and all the things that we end up operating on. So there's always a relationship between sensory discrimination and executive functioning.
Right.
And it interacts through our body because where we get executive function before we have higher level cognition and meta things going on in our head, it's happening as we enact it, as our body and our eyes shift and look, and then as our eyes look away, and as our hand reaches and touches, and then as the thing happens. So it is, executive functions depend on these sensory, affective, motor, embodied experiences. And we see it all the time, but you know, then you start working with a child who's maybe 10 and they were referred to you and they were struggling with attention and they're also struggling with their motor coordination. And we see the relationship between those things because our theory tells us that, but it isn't always even true in the diagnostic summary we get that other folks are not putting those dots together, right?
Yeah, I had just an aha moment around in the executive functioning capacities that you have listed in the executive functioning and effortful control box. I had an aha moment about the shifting and you describing like the flexibility being related to the fact that my sensory discrimination system can still identify an object no matter which way it's facing. And so if I have, let's use the car example, if I have my car and it's on its wheels and I turn it upside down, I can still recognize that it's a car because I have visual, perceptual, sensory discrimination functions that allow me to do that. And that means that helps me be flexible about which way the car could be oriented in space. Or is that what you were saying, Tracy? Is that kind of how those two things link together?
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And also the fact that, you know, objects have affordances of things like go. It can go or it cannot go. So even in that same video, this little guy got really interested in how if the car is on the surface, it will roll. But if I put the wheels behind the edge of the pillow, it won't go. Because those two affordances are interacting with each other. And now it's stuck. And so this is the car that can go, and this is the car that's stuck. And that affectively was really interesting to him.
And the discrimination
when
of
I was,
that.
Yes.
The differentiation in discrimination of the difference of where you'd put that, and then you were affectively highlighting it. And that was resourcing his discrimination, like sensory discrimination function for an affordance of go or not go, depending on where he put the car. Oh my gosh, so many things.
So many things. And then he doesn't have to be so stuck on, I just always put cars together.
Yeah.
But what do cars do? And that's like a precursor to the representational play, which is later, pretend and all of that. But this is sort of the intermediary. And I think, a lot of our kids get stuck in these developmental stages because it's integration dependent.
Yes.
I have to see how the sensory discrim, the motor action, the properties of the world interacting with the object of interest, and then how all of that leads to potential plans and potential options. And so we're integrating across high route of S, high route of A, low route of M, and keeping that low route of A kind of super juicy, right? So, and then with this little boy, because he happened to have Fragile X syndrome, I also had to work in his window of tolerance or I was going to lose him.
Yeah.
So it is that interaction in any one of those parts that kind of gets a little, rocky is going to make the next thing harder. So our work is complicated that way.
Wow.
So Tracy, I'm interested in the moving from that very concrete, literal understanding of how the world works to abstract thinking and representational thinking. Do we just have to have developmentally a bank, or I heard someone talk about it in terms of we're prediction machines? So do we have to have this experience of all the concepts, up, down, stop, go, rolling, whatever? Do we just have to have this suite of really expansive repertoires, I guess, so that we can then go, oh, okay, I can put that together when you start going or rather than Tracy making this crazy noise? It's like, oh, Tracy's trying to represent an ambulance or, an emergency services vehicle. Oh, I get what she's doing there because I've literally heard that in my concrete cause effect, literal bank of ideas, of experiences about the world. Is that how inferences, representational comes about? Because we start to see that in little kids where they start to get the pretend eating, and sometimes it might be in their body part, you start eating their little hand and then eating their food or whatever. What's the point with which you tip over to more representational thinking, and what helps that happen? Like, is this sensory affective motor?
Yeah, there's so much. Yeah, it is all sensory affective motor, kind of repeated sequences of lots and lots of exploration. But on some level, it's partly that you have millions of repetitions of this sensory representational thing, this thing that I can hold and touch and feel, and it has something that moves. And as I interact with those two things, the affordance of it's a pick-upable and it's a look at and a spinnable, to this thing can interact with the supporting surface and do something. You have to have lots and lots of repetition of the perceptual experience of all of that. And that's coinciding with the play partner, usually an adult, or maybe like a sibling in this case, doing the representational thing and talking about it and naming it. So the language stuff is going to layer on kind of adjacent to the perceptual experiences, but the perceptual experience bucket has to be pretty richly filled for the rest of that to even start to be meaningful and accessible. But it all is a simultaneous experience. So we have to have both. And what happens to lots of our kids that have difficulties in this developmental area is that it exhausts the play partners. So if you're with a 2-year-old, or let's say you're with a 6 or 9-month-old, you're very excited to, hold the car and go vroom, 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 vroom a lot of times. And then pretty soon the kid is going to start to do it with you because their imitation skills maybe have them start to do it, and your affect is in synchrony and you're sort of in partnership. But if you have a child where this development is going to be slow, they're going to need 1 million, not 100 repetitions, and the play partners get tired. And so the kid is maybe doing this thing, but we don't keep doing the woo, 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 I'm so excited kind of thing, because it just doesn't feel so available somehow. And if their perceptual cup doesn't have enough abundance to it and also specificity to it, it's kind of both of those things working together, then they don't fill that cup very well. And so it doesn't transition as easily.
So you're trying to individually fill the need in terms of perception. So for a kiddo that it's not unfolding, the quality of the object having a part that's still, I'm talking about a car, but a part that's still and a part that moves, and they're exploring maybe the perceptual qualities of that, then, and they want to just go vroom, vroom, vroom 1,000 times, and you're like, okay, like, can we do something else with this thing now?
Yeah.
But their perceptual cup of knowing that there's a part that's still and a part that moves still hasn't got it yet. And so we have to then come to how else can we fill that perceptual quality that you're seeking, give you more exposure or differentiation between the still part and the moving part, like bigger parts and like maybe a bigger car with parts that are still, or like how do we explore that and give you more information about that so that the perception actually lands for that individual? Is that right? Or
Yeah, it is right. Yeah. I have to look this thing up really quick because I want to make sure I attribute the exact phrase to the right person. I couldn't remember, so now I remember because I looked it up. But okay, so I was a guest on a podcast recently with Jan Winhall, who's a dear colleague in the polyvagal faculty with me, and her approach is called the felt sense polyvagal model. And we were on a podcast together recently, and there was it was just an incredible opportunity. And there's two women who wrote a book together that were also on the panel. One is Sarah Bergenfeld, and the other is Beth Ann Mallow, is I think how you say her last name, Mallow. And they wrote a book that is coming out next year, but it's called Wired to Feel: Autism as a Condition of Sensory Surplus. So here's the thing that's interesting. They're describing that if we're talking about this little boy that I was just talking about, who happens to have Fragile X, but could also have a formal diagnosis of autism, his brain is a brain of sensory surplus. So when he's looking at cars, a lot of what he's taking in is an overabundance of information, differently than mine's taking it in. So when he's seeing categories of color, that's because that's giantly important to his brain. And where his brain is taking in the abundance of that in a way that could be overwhelming, he needs to spend a lot more time trying to figure out how to make sense of that overwhelm. And that the color feature or the shine feature or the feature that it has movable parts and still parts, that's very confusing when your brain takes that in with an abundance and a surplus. So you have to spend a whole lot more time dealing with the surplus before you can move past it to what else could this be. And I don't think we always appreciate that some neurodivergent kinds of presentations really require different kinds of exploration. It's not just exploration for the purpose of cars are cars, but it's that all of this stuff, I need to make sense of the fact that why is this single bin holding all of these different things that don't make any sense to go together?
Yeah. Like, because if your perception of that is just like, they're all so different in my experience. Like, what is wrong with these weird people that don't separate out these things? Like, why? Why don't they do that? That's so fascinating though, Tracy. And it so resonates, don't you think, Michelle?
I got goosebumps when you read that out.
Oh my God.
It's fascinating. Interestingly, for me, that tips into that exec functioning motivational bias, because that's what's also kindling up with the sensory qualities. It's like, let me look at that, where you and I are like, hey, at our work there was a car park with abundant real life cars, and so we would go from this play on, with red cars down the slide, or in your example, Tracy, to be like, oh my goodness, I think there's red cars in the car park. Let's find the other red cars. And then we'd go to the, consider real life cars. But if the motivational system is like, oh, no, I haven't finished with sorting the redness over here, that's another classification, looking out the window at cars at a car park. It helps kind of makes sense for me why I'm not done yet. That motivational system hasn't finished doing the job yet, and it's going to take a lot of time for me to get through the detail of this, Michelle. My work's not done. It becomes not just a sticky thought or a lagging exec function, skills gap. It's like, I've still got the work to do here in that sensory abundance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I guess if you need to lay down a neural circuit or a pathway that tells you what red is, and there's a lot of noise, you need to do it a lot to get that, to get the right thing to come together. Like if you're firing and it's kind of going a lot of places, it's like, well, I still haven't landed the pathway that I need to land to make it be red. And I love the way that in your example, Tracy, you added the affect to the thing that needed to be categorized, rather than try to add to his game, or you just met him developmentally, right? So and that affect is what will help with the pathway building as well, right?
That's right. Because that, in the spirit, we talk about the A function as low route is social emotional in character, and the high route is this motivational system that hooks us into executive functioning and effortful control and all of our self other systems around that. But they're both affective. They're valence-based in nature, and that is the glue of the nervous system, is the valence. So very powerful to see those relationships between how that foundation of sensory discrim, the very critical importance of affect as the source of regulation, the source of motivation. That's what allows that landing pad to have width and dimension. And gosh, we see it in real time in the work we do. It's beautiful to just watch that unfolding and to give ourselves permission to just meet them exactly where they are. And not have to add meaning until meaning makes sense to add.
As I'm mentoring some of the wonderful OTs, they're showing little videos, as I mentioned last time. So lots of times the questions, they're like, how can I get more engagement with this child? And it's often when I see the little video is this example of the child that you're mentioning and his absolute interest in the perceptual qualities of the car, whether it be red. That's their focus. And so when we look at the video, there's not that we need it, but there's no orientation of the body to the other. There mightn't be any eye gaze to the face of the other. There's no reciprocal vocalizations, or so you could say you're pretty, if we're thinking about DIR, there's interest in the world and there's emerging engagement with the other and shared meaning. And it's interesting because sometimes we're wanting that little one to interact with us and engage with us, as I think DR used the honeypot, like we're the honeypot, in a more maybe explicit way. But it's fascinating because it's like, do you know what? They're still engaging with the features of that car, and that's where we need to be. So if you want engagement and we want to be with them, it's around the car, because your face isn't the thing that they're exploring right now. And so don't worry that they're not looking at you or they're not orientating their body to you or whatever. There's still beautiful reciprocal engagement in that play. But as we're saying, the salient point for them, which we're meeting them at, is perhaps the perceptual qualities of that vehicle or the thing of interest for them at the time. So, yeah.
Did you, though, unlock a little bit more active, I don't know if that's the right word, but did you unlock a little bit more self-otherness in your example, Tracy, with the affective, like, because, you know, you clearly caught, you know, we all get those moments in treatment where you do something and the kid's like they look at you and they're like, do that again. Like, what did you just do? That was magic. Like, and you go, oh yes, I'll do that again. Like, keep doing, and you keep doing that because you know that something landed just then, especially when you get that strong orienting response. So did he orient to you and like?
Oh yeah. Totally. The other thing that's really interesting, and I think in the little clip actually that I ended up, you know, it's just a little short clip that is shared, but he had this interest. He started to really want to see what my face was doing. He really wanted, because it was connected to the affect of the things that he was interested in. So sometimes I think when we share affect, we're sharing it more in the reciprocity space. But when you have a child who's still kind of cooking more at level 2, and they're really in engagement and they're sort of trying to find you, sometimes your affect really is about the thing. It's not about the you. And because if you pull into reciprocity too high, that's not so interesting. It's just what you just described, Michelle. So it's sort of meeting them where they're at and letting affect be within that. But then what was so funny, and this is also just a reflection of at the moment that I was treating him, I have a lot of, you know, different kinds of training just because my career has included lots of fortunate experiences. And Sally Rogers is one of my mentors, and she's the author of the Early Start Denver model. So I'm trained in Early Start Denver model. I don't use it as much as I maybe use some of my other interventions. But anyway, one of the things that happens a lot in ESDM is when the child starts to be ready for it and they're pairing to your affect, is that you might use some distal pointing to help them understand that me and you and this thing around us that is the world. And so anyway, I noticed in this video that I was using a little bit of that pointing strategy. And because this little guy was trying to figure out how to work with me, with the cars, and with this option of an action that happened over there. So I'm kind of cueing him affectively, but I'm also trying to help him see, like, we're in this whole gestalt here together. It's not just you and me, and it's not just you and the cars. It's you and me and this thing that's happening and all of that, and trying to create a larger container. Because sometimes when our kids are in this sensory surplus sorting out the intensity, they can get into this a smaller insular kind of space. And then your affect kind of helps them to broaden that. But then also, like, there's other stuff out here. And so I'm going to often use bins and things like that so that I can quickly move things into broader spaces. And there's so many parts to that. But I think it's the developmental process of praxis underlying this, trusting that when I get that online, it's not just the social system, it's the praxis system. You know?
And you were pulling in through your higher out of A function in terms of the affective cueing, you were pulling in the executive functioning of shifting, and not just shifting between like the car and your face, but like the car. And you weren't intentionally trying to make him look at your face, but that executive function was happening because he was now shifting, and now you're kind of shifting him further out in space. And again, like that reorient to midline function as well. And gosh, no wonder it's so hard if you have so much noise to have some of these things land in the right way. And no wonder you would want it to be so controlled sometimes, because all those little bits and disruptions make it so hard. So it's like, I'm just trying to land a pathway in my brain here, people. Like, why do you have to make that so hard for me? Just do it the right way. Anyway, I think it's a very good thing for everyone, like me included, for us to be able to have that in mind, so that we don't do the jumping ahead, because it's so, that pull to go too far above where they are developmentally is so strong. And it helps for us to have the language to explain what is really important about the fact that we stay right here. And that's
for as long as it takes.
Yeah, and it's a relief as well. So it's a relief for me as a therapist to know that that's way more effective for me to be doing that than it is for me to be trying to teach a thing that's above the developmental capacity. And it would be relieving for parents, I would assume. As a parent, it would be a relief to know, oh, this is the work right here, rather than having to teach this thing that's maybe the developmental capacity is just not ready for yet. Anyway, that's my perspective.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. So we don't, teach shoe tying to a 2-year-old because they don't have capacity. We don't give a piece of gum to chew to a little one because they don't have capacity. We don't, have kids learn how to drive cars until they have capacity. And there is a developmental story here. And we have to really meet everybody right where they're at in development, in the DIR, right? Yeah.
Cool.
Love it.
And that's a wrap on today's episode of Spirited Conversations. We hope this sparked something for you, whether it's a new clinical idea, a fresh perspective, or just the reminder that you're definitely not alone in this work. So if this conversation resonated with you, we would love for you to share it with anybody you think it would resonate with, anyone on their own learning journey. And speaking of learning journeys, you can find and access any information relating to the podcast from our website, but also you can come and join us in the many different courses and communities that the wonderful Developmental FX team have put together. So head to developmentalfx.org, where you can get any information you need about mentoring with any of us. And lastly, if you're enjoying listening to us trialogue together, please just take a moment to either subscribe or just leave a review, and it will genuinely help more people find us. So until next time, keep the conversations spirited.